everyone. Welcome to our 24th annual Jewish Book Festival, sponsored by the Jewish Federation of the San Diego and Pomona Valley. I'm co-chairing the event with my co-chair Denise Shapiro. I want to thank you all in person and Zoom audiences for your flexibility in accommodating our last minute changes as we're learning how to work with our new normal hybrid technology. And unfortunately, this morning we are having technical difficulties with the Zoom. So the sound may be impaired. Please bear with us. We apologize. We're doing the best we can. Okay, it takes a tremendous amount of effort and commitment to create this festival. So before we start the program, I'd like to acknowledge a lot of wonderful people. Thank you to our dedicated committee members. Raise your hand. Thank you. Federation staff and our coordinator, Rebecca Russell. Council in New York, from which we choose our authors. Our in-person tech wizard, Jason Moss, and our behind-the-scenes in New York tech wizard, Jake Towell. Our literary circle members whose financial support makes this festival, this entire festival, possible. Members of the board of the Jewish Federation. Well, thank you for that too. This morning's program will be a presentation by Kate Shapiro, followed by Q&A. If you've not already done so, here in in-person audience, please turn off your cell phones and save your questions for after the author's presentation. If you are watching virtually and have questions, just go to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and type them in, and we will record them and share them. The chat will be disabled. If you wish to purchase this book or any other book, for those of you in the room who have the opportunity to buy it today and have our authors sell them, those of you on Zoom will have the opportunity to purchase a book next time you come to an in-person event, or you can just go to the link in the chat and that will take you to the book. And now it is my pleasure to introduce this morning's author. Kate Shapiro is the award-winning and New York Times best-selling author of 9 novels, including, you know this one, The Art Force, the New England Book Award for Fiction, among other honors, and which she shared with us in our book festival in 2013. Welcome back. Her books have been selected as community reads throughout the country and have been translated in over a dozen languages. She holds a PhD in sociology and has directed research projects for a residential substance abuse facility, worked as a systems analyst / statistician, headed the Boston office of a software development firm, and served as an adjunct professor teaching sociology at Tufts University and creative writing at Northeastern University. She likes writing books the best. Barbara splits her time between Boston and Naples, Florida. Thank you, Barbara, for joining us. We look forward to your presentation. Well, good morning. Good morning. It's been 9 years since I was here last. It's like, really? How does that happen? But it does. So I thought today, so our new book is Metropolis. Bright color. Not my choice. but we can talk about that later. So I thought what I'd do today is read you a very short abridged version of the first chapter, and then talk about where the ideas came from and all that other author stuff. So Metropolis opens with a post from the Boston Globe on bostonglobe.com that reports that somebody fell down the elevator shaft at the Metropolis storage warehouse and has been flown to Mass General Hospital, and nobody knows any of the details. Chapter 1 is 6 months later, and it's from the viewpoint of Zach Davidson. And because of the accident, is in the process of losing it. It's Rose's fault. It's Etna's fault. It's Otis Elevator's fault. All of the above, and none of the above. Zach Davidson hovers at the edge of the crowd. The auctioneer doesn't know he's to be the recipient of the money from the forthcoming sales, and he wants to keep it that way. Although he doesn't know why this matters, he isn't even sure why he's come, unless it's some perverse form of self-flagellation. Most of you know the rules, the auctioneer begins in her booming voice. Due to the foreclosure of Metropolis Storage Warehouse, the contents of 22 abandoned units are for sale. The minimum bid is $100, cash only. I'll open the door to each unit. You'll have 5 minutes to see what's inside, then I'll start. You may not cross the threshold. You may not touch anything. You may not ask me any questions because I have no answers. Is that clear? A murmur of acceptance echoes off the concrete walls and floor, the steel reinforced ceiling. They're standing outside of Rose's office, and every direction Zach looks pisses him off. Rose's empty desk, the dim bulbs, the peeling paint, the yellow police tape stretched across the elevator. He's owned Metropolis for 10 years, bought at a ridiculously low price in a quasi-legal deal that looked to be his way out of his bad choices. Although it still belongs to him, however temporarily, he has no idea what's behind any of the doors. The building had a well-deserved shady reputation when he purchased it, and he concluded he was better off not knowing what was being stored there. In retrospect, a little prying might have averted this whole mess. The auctioneer, a beefy woman with biceps twice the size of Zach's, slides a 10-foot door across its track to reveal a murky room lumpy with shadowy objects. She reaches inside, flips on the light. Revealed by the naked bulb, the unit is decidedly dull. An old refrigerator, an electric stove, a bunch of mismatched chairs, a couple of mattresses, clothes overflowing from open cartons. Zach groans inwardly. He needs every cent he can squeeze out of this auction, and no one's going to bid on any of this junk. But he's wrong. After the auctioneer starts rippling her tongue in an impenetrable torrent of words, people start raising their hands. When the contents go for $850, he's both flabbergasted and thrilled. The other units will surely contain more impressive stuff than this and should generate higher bids. Some do, some don't, some are completely empty. And then there are the peculiar ones. A unit that looks like a stage, waiting for the evening performance to begin, with a pricey office suite including a desk, bookshelves, and a small conference table surrounded by 4 chairs.
And then there's a perfectly immaculate one, reminiscent of a monk's cell. A neatly made single bed, a roll-top desk, a chair, a small bureau, nothing else. There's a unit that appears to belong to a couple of teenagers. 2 desks piled high with books and trophies, walls covered with movie posters and overflowing corkboards. Another reminds Zach of an upscale studio apartment. It's fully furnished with a bed, a couch, a television, and a compact kitchen featuring a refrigerator, a microwave, and a fancy hot plate. The last one she shows them, high on the 5th floor, is full of photographic equipment and was clearly used as a darkroom and as a bedroom. Zach stares at the sheets pooling at the edge of the cot, at the dirty clothes heaped on the floor. He's seen 3 beds in 3 different units over the last hour. If Rose didn't know people were living here, she should have. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen, even if it isn't the lawsuit that is currently upending his life. It occurs to him that he never considered the inner life of Metropolis, this repository of memories and treasures and secrets and junk, full of things to be honored, or things someone forgot or was just too lazy or sentimental to throw away. But now, looking around, the questions surge. Who were these people? Did they come here to work, to study, to hide, to survive? Did they know each other? Were there disagreements, friendships, love affairs? And, most intriguing of all, why did they leave so much behind? The novel then goes on to answer Zach's questions about these odd leftovers and the people who abandoned them, but it reveals so much more. How each one of the 6 major characters, different races, different backgrounds, different lives, different futures, begin to interact with each other. The chaotic entanglements that ensue, and how each battles societal forces beyond their own control, and how their deep secrets play out, and what really happened the night somebody fell down the elevator shaft. So, that's to tantalize you into reading the book. It turns out that each of the characters, the main characters in the book, were a part of each one of those units that Zach saw in that first chapter. And by the end, you understand what they left behind and why they left behind it, and all kinds of other stuff. So one of the questions that authors always get is, where do you get your ideas? And this seems like it should be an easy question to answer, but it actually isn't that easy. So Metropolis has been whirling around in my brain. Oh, I'm walking out of the camera. Okay, sorry, people. I like to pace. Okay, I'll constrain myself. So anyway, the ideas for Metropolis have been in my head for 30. Well, if I was here 9 years ago, it's probably 40 years. We don't have to think about that. For a long, long time. And they were very separate and didn't come together for all of those years. So the first idea for this book came when I was in graduate school, and I was studying sociology, and we saw a film, which this tells you maybe it was 40 years ago, you can now see on YouTube, and it takes about 15 minutes, but It's called The Race of Life. And I was in a class which was about social class in America. And so in The Race of Life, it would be as if everyone in this room were lined up over here. And you were going to race 600 yards, and whoever won the race would get $100. But before you start, you have to respond to a series of questions. If you respond as yes, then you get to take 2 steps forward. Questions like, your mother went to college, take 2 steps forward. You had more than 25 books in your house growing up, take 2 steps forward. You never had to help your parents pay the bills, 2 steps forward. I think you can see where this is going. There are like 25 questions, and by the time the race starts, you see that a starting line for each person is not the same. And this starting line is different for everyone based on nothing that they have done themselves. It doesn't have to do with their intelligence, it doesn't have to do with their ambition, it doesn't have to do with their talents. It has to do with something that they had no control over. Many of us have control over to whom you were born. This is a truth that we don't like to talk about in this country. We like to talk about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and all that. But the starting line is not the same, which doesn't mean that there can be a person back here who runs really fast and wins, or that the person along the front there can't stumble and fall and lose. It's just that we don't start in the same place, and people have different privileges. So I'm sitting there in graduate school. I hadn't thought I would like to write a novel since I was about 8 years old. And I thought, God, this would be a really interesting thing to write a novel about. But I'm going to become a sociologist. I'm not going to become a novelist. But I went home that night and I opened a file which I very cleverly named Novel Ideas. And I scribbled this down and I put it in the file. And although you heard I did all of these other things, I kept this file. And any time there was, an idea that came by, I would just drop it in. So I saw a documentary about Vivian Maier. I don't know if any of you know who she is. So she was a photographer in the 1950s. She was this kind of enigmatic, wild, sort of creepy woman who worked as a nanny for multiple families. And she went around and took photographs. She became one of the main, if not the most important, street photographer in the mid-20th century. But she had a camera, which is called a Rolleiflex. And the kind of camera that it is that you look down into it and then you take the picture. So people don't know, it's not like you're holding an iPhone up. People don't know that you're taking pictures of them. And her goal was to take photographs when people didn't know they were being photographed, because she believed this is how you could tell who they really were. And man, these photographs not only did that, but they touched on some kind of human universality that is just it's incredible. And then she started taking pictures of streetscapes with nobody in them. And these were equally as powerful. Again, getting at the human condition. And I was so incredibly taken with her work. I hadn't known anything about street photography before I saw this documentary, and I thought, wow, it would be really fun to write a book about her. Novel ideas. Then I read the book, Let the Great World Spin. Have any of you read that? It's a really, if you haven't read it, it's really good. In this book, there are a group of multiple characters who don't know each other, they have nothing in common, but they are linked through an event in New York City, and their lives become entwined with each other. I thought, wow, wouldn't it be fun to write a book about a whole bunch of different people, and then see what happened to them all? Novel ideas file. And then I wrote a bunch of books. The Art Forger being one of them. Then I wrote another book called The Muralist, which is an art forger. It's art, it's history, it's suspense, psychological thriller, whatever. And then I wrote a book called The Muralist, which also is suspense, psychological thriller that takes place in 1939, right before World War II. And then I wrote another book called The Collector's Apprentice, which also is a historical novel, psychological suspense, about a woman and other people in the 1920s in Philadelphia. And so I thought, I want to do something a little different. So there's this trilogy. I mean, they're not a series, but it's like, okay, I think I'm going to try and do something different. So I said, okay, the book is going, whoops, I'm walking again. Sorry. So I'll write a book that is in the present, none of this jumping around in historical time. Takes place in Boston, where I live, not New York, Philadelphia, or Paris, where I don't live. And it would have one major character who would have one major storyline, and that was going to be the book. Well, things didn't turn out exactly like that. And while I was struggling to come up with this idea that was going to do all of these things and be so different from my other books, I read an article in the Boston Globe. And in that article, they described a storage facility that is this big brick monstrosity that sits on Mass Ave in Cambridge directly across from MIT. And anybody who has driven down there has noticed this, because it looks kind of like a medieval castle with turrets and round windows, and it's a storage facility. So what the hell is this place? And in the article, they were closing it down because MIT had bought it. They were going to make it into dormitories, which I thought was a really dumb idea, seeing as how there weren't very many windows. So they didn't turn it into dormitories. Now they're talking about lab space, which makes more sense. But anyway, in this article, they had photos of people moving things in, moving things out, and they were all different kinds of people. And they had things from the most expensive to the cheapest and it was like, click. The Race of Life. This is a place where you can have very, very rich people who are storing their wine collections and art and who knows what else. Or you can have really poor people, maybe a homeless person, who live there. And that way, I could get my Race of Life book. And what if one of them was a street photographer, a homeless street photographer who had a Rolleiflex and went around Boston taking photos of people who didn't know he was taking photos of them because he wanted to get the essence of who people are. And then, so what was my other idea? So there was, so that was it. And did that. So I put these four things together and created Metropolis. which does take place in present-day Boston. Unfortunately, it has 6 or 9 or 12 different plots. There are 6 viewpoint characters, and it's a mystery that pretty much centers on street photography. So I didn't fulfill my original goal. So I blame Vivian Meyer. I blame Colin McCann, who wrote Let the Great World Spin. And I guess I blame the Race of Life and the Boston Globe for screwing me up. Or maybe I actually thank them. So let me step back a little bit. So I had all of these different careers, and then I had 2 kids, and yeah, everybody's laughing because you know what happens when you have a high-powered career, and so I said I can't do this anymore. It's, you know. I was having lunch with my mother, and I was whining to her, as daughters are wont to do. And I said to her, I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am. If I'm not Superwoman, who am I? And my very wise mother said, answering my question with a question, as all nice Jewish mothers do. And she said, if you had 1 year to live, what would you do? I said, I'd write a novel and spend more time with my children. And that's how I started writing novels. Then there's the whole long thing about how I convinced my husband to do it, and anyways, that's how this shift happened. And I have written, so this is my 9th novel that's been published, but I have written 14 of them, 4 which never did get published, and the one I'm working on now, which hopefully will be published in the next year or 2. But so, anyway, back to Metropolis. So we have this motley crew of people and all their motley possessions. And there are 6 main characters. There are 6 main characters who couldn't be more different from each other. They're white, they're black, they're brown, they're Jewish, they're Christian, they're atheist, they're very, very wealthy, they're very, very poor, and none of them would have ever interacted with the other one if they didn't have a link to Metropolis storage warehouse. And so I was sitting there with all of these plots and ideas for all these characters. And I'm like, okay, how am I ever gonna pull this off? So I went back to my sociology background, and I'm actually a statistician. And so I use statistical methods to write my books. You probably don't know, unless you've heard me speak before, that all plots follow a normal curve. This is true for the main plot, for the subplots, for all of the character arcs. I also use bubblograms to assess the relationship between all of the different people. So like with Metropolis, I had these 6 different people, plus there were peripheral people who weren't viewpoint characters who were involved in the story enough to merit a circle on my bubblegram, to assess the relationships between everybody. So at the beginning of the book, there were very few, but it turned out that Rose, who is the manager of Metropolis, was the center, because she knew everybody at the beginning. She's the only one. by the end, when I finished my first draft and redrew the bubble map, that there were many more lines connecting all of the different people. So then what I do is I figure out the main storyline and I plot it on the normal curve, the major plot points of that story. Then I have a whole pack of normal curves in a file on my desk. And then I take another one and fill in the major plot points for each of the subplots. So each character starts out with a problem and their problem is either solved or not solved at the end, so they have a different series of plot points. So I do this for every character for the plots and for the subplots. So I have a stack of them. Then I do one that combines them all. So the bottom line is the time in the book. And so some of them start at the beginning, some of them start a little bit further off, so the timelines are a little bit different. And so I end up with one giant map of the book. But that's really hard to deal with, so I do something that's very, very sophisticated, and unless you're a statistician, you probably won't understand this, but I'll tell you about it anyway. I use multicolored file cards. And what I do is I then take apart each of the plot points for each character and each plot. So for example, Rose, who is kind of at the center of the book. So she has like, say, 20 major plot points. So she's Rose, so I use red file cards. And I took 20 of them, and each one had one of the major plot points on it. Then I took Marta. Marta is hiding in Metropolis from ICE. So I used green cards for her. And maybe she had 15 major plot points. So I put her 15 plot points. Then there's Serge, he didn't have as many, so he had maybe 8 cards, and on and on and on, until I end up with a stack of many different colored cards. And for this book, there were so many of them that, you have your standard colored ones, and then I had to get the neon ones, which I really didn't like nearly as much. And then even that wasn't enough, and I had to get those awful pastel ones, where they're like this light blue and light pink, and it was really bad. I did what I had to do, and I bought those pastel file cards. And so I had a stack of them, and then what I do is I put them out on my dining room table and move them around to try and get the story moving from each person's viewpoint. And when I do that, so it's like it can be weeks, and I walk around the table and move things and change things, and the good news is I don't have to have any dinner parties. And, we can't eat dinner; we have to go out. It's all good. And then I take that. Now I have a mixed stack of cards, and the way I lay them out on the table is they're according to the normal curve, which is based on the idea of a 4-act structure, which is what I write. And then I take the first act, which is maybe, I don't know, in this case, it might have been 30 cards. And I lay that out really carefully on a ledge in my study, hoping to get as many places where I have more than one card in each scene, because it's really important to get the scenes to be about more than one thing. And so I lay it out on this in a row in my study, and then I start to write. This is, the first draft, which I hate. I hate writing the first draft. And looking at that blank screen and not knowing, and it's like pulling teeth. So I give myself a minimum of 5 pages that I have to write every day for the first draft. Sometimes I cheat a little bit and do a lot of dialogue, because dialogue takes up more room on the page, so I can get to 5 pages. And then the next day, I start with those 5 pages, and maybe there's a page, maybe 2, that are worth saving, and I do that, and then I do another 5 pages the next day, until I have gotten the first draft finished, and I'm like, oh, phew. Then I start rewriting. And I was telling somebody earlier that I usually do about 7 or 8 full drafts of each novel that I write, but each page has been rewritten at least 20 times. And that's the part I really like. So I'm finishing up a book now. So real writers like to rewrite, because there's so many things when you write a novel that you have to take into consideration. You've got your plot, and then you've got your subplots, and then you've got all your characters, and then you've got things like environment and where the geography of where you are, and then there's the environmental cues that you need, and then there's getting the characters to have more depth, and then they're getting the writing to have more depth. And so it's just, unless you are a completely brilliant person, which, apparently, like Tolstoy was, and Dickens wrote his very complicated books serially, which I was like, what? But for me, I'm not a genius. I can't do that, so I just do it over and over again. So one more last statistical thing is, while I'm writing it, this is one of my favorites, I create tension charts. And these tension charts, scene by scene in the book, I give each scene a tension coefficient. So you can't have a scene, I don't know why people laugh at this. You can't have a scene that has no tension, because, as somebody told me earlier, you don't grab me at the beginning and I'm done. So would be a good way. But some scenes, like right after you have a high tension scene, sometimes you gotta give the reader a break a little bit, or sometimes you gotta do a little backstory. So those scenes get a 0.25 coefficient. If there's a scene where there are more things going on, like for example, that scene part of the scene that I read to you, and you don't know, you're confused about what's happening, and you see all these things that might make sense and don't make sense. So a scene like that, I give a tension coefficient of 0.5 up. Then there are those scenes, like I was telling you, when there are like 3 or 4 different colored cards that all merge into one scene, that would be 0.75. And if it's a really, really big scene, it gets the big 1 point up. So that's what I do. And so I created these 6 different characters, each one of their stories, how they interact with each other. So Zach is in his mid-30s, he's charismatic, good-looking, an ex-drug dealer who owns the building, loses it and tries to get it back. Rose Gentilini, who is he's in her late 40s, the breadwinner of a struggling family. She manages Metropolis and takes bribes from people who are living illegally within the building. Then there's Jason Franklin, who's in his early 40s, a really good guy, a lawyer who was up the top pinnacles of this law practice, that he did the wrong thing for the right reason, and he fell from his pinnacle, and now he's trying to start his law practice up again, and his office is in Metropolis. Then there's Serge Laurent, who is mentally unstable, lives at Metropolis, and takes photographs using a Rolleiflex of all of these people in Boston. Then there's Liddy Haynes, who is very, very wealthy, beautiful, high society, lives in the penthouse of the most expensive building in Boston, and she is an abused wife, and her husband would not allow her to bring her children's things. He sent the kids off to Switzerland to boarding school, made her move into this fancy place, and wouldn't let her bring any of the kids' things. So she has a storage unit where she saves all of her kids' things, but they're not just there. She has set them up, so it looks like their bedrooms at home. And then the last is Marta, who's in her 30s, a lovely young woman, who through no fault of her own has fallen, into a situation where she's from Venezuela, is in graduate school at Tufts, where I went, studying in sociology as I did, and working on her doctoral dissertation, which is about the race of life. So she is hiding in her storage unit from ICE. So these people, they're black, they're white, they're brown, they're Christians, they're Jews, they're abused, they're hiding, they're mentally ill. Liddy and Marta were brought up on the higher echelons of society. Zach in upper middle class Boston. Rose is the product of a gritty working class background. Jason is comfortably in the middle, and Serge was profoundly poor. But in the end of this story, some of them have gone up in scale, and some have gone down, but at the end, it's where they started out that makes all the difference in whether they succeed or fail at what they need to do. So in many ways, this book is the book of my heart, because it's been rumbling around in my head for so often and for such a long time. And, I struggled with the story in many, many ways. And I also fell in love with the characters. I'm talking to some about this earlier. They're all real people to me. So the book, it is about the struggle of social class, but it's also, there's love in there, there's luck, there's heartbreak, there's family relationships, there's heroic efforts, terrible mistakes, and I just really, except for that first draft, had a really fun time writing it, and I hope that you will all have a fun time reading it too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Barbara is going to take your questions. So if you're on Zoom, put your questions in the chat and we'll decode them on this end. And if you are in the audience, raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you so that the Zoom audience can hear it. And if I don't hear, okay, then I don't see any, one question, okay.
Hi, Barbara, I really enjoyed that. What struck me was that the Metropolis itself was a character in the book. And being silly me, I would love to have heard its viewpoint of all the characters. Did you ever think of doing that?
I did, actually.
Very good, she's gonna get her exercise tonight. I did actually think about having Metropolis have a voice, and I did actually try it, and wrote a couple of chapters. I just couldn't make it work. I think, there are some writers who would have been able to make it work, but I just couldn't get it to fit. And the story is so realistic, that to have that voice and bring kind of a spiritual kind of piece, I just couldn't pull it off. But I appreciate that because, that would have been really nice. Those people in here are nuts.
Okay. That was wonderful, Barbara. Are any of the characters based on people you actually know, or how fictionalized are they?
They're all completely fictional, not based on anybody or anything that I know, and any resemblance to people living or dead. No animals were harmed. I will mention that Rose has 2 daughters, Emma and Charlotte, and those are my granddaughters' names. I did actually use them as the model for those 2 characters. I have 2 children, Scott and Robin, and that's the name of Libby's children. They are not like my children, although there are some things that actually were. So, but mostly I'm taking the 5th.
I had a quick question. There was water and electricity in some of these units?
Yes, not only is there water and electricity, but there is heating and cooling, because a lot of people store things in these facilities that need to be temperature sensitive. So in the real Metropolis is there is electricity, and there is water in the bathrooms, which is so the characters that live there use the water from the bathrooms, or they have pitchers of water. And in Metropolis, which I have no idea whether the real one has this, there is a janitor's closet that happens to have conveniently has a shower in it, so that they can take showers. But the temperature control stuff, and you kind of have to do it.
Wonderful book. Have you considered doing a sequel?
That would kind of be a sort of easy way out for my next book. But I put these poor characters, these 6 characters, through the ringer in this book, and they had to deal with so much stuff, and they had so many things to overcome and to go through. I just couldn't do that to them again.
Okay, I have questions if no one else does. Okay. Oh, sure.
I love it. I heard talk to her, but I love the muralists, and I want to know, do you usually have someone that's Jewish in all your books? Is this part of your?
I pretty much do, and in most of my books, the protagonist is Jewish. The Muralist was the most Jewish of my books, in the sense that it took place right before World War II, and although it was about the abstract expressionists who worked for the WPA creating murals, which happened to be Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, Lee Krasner, Roland de Kooning. It's Eleanor Roosevelt is the main character in that, and I did research on her and found out that her greatest regret in her life was that she had not convinced, actually she used the word forced, Franklin to bring more Jews in from Europe before World War II started. And so that is one of the major plot streams of So that's my most Jewish. I also wrote a really, really good thriller. Terrorism. It was all about the Jews and the Holocaust Museum, the Holocaust, and that's one of those books that is still sitting in my drawer.
Okay, now here's a question. Since so many of your books have art as a central character, where does your interest in art come from?
When I was a little girl, I wanted to be an artist, and my parents were very supportive. My father built me a little studio on one side of the basement. My mother took me to art classes at one of the local museums. But unfortunately, it became clear pretty quickly that this was not where my talents lay. So I became an art appreciator. And I travel a lot, and everywhere I go, the first thing I do is go to the local art museum. And although I have no degrees in art, I took maybe one art history class as an undergraduate, I think that after having written these 4 books, I do have a master's degree in art history.
Okay, I have to keep going. You have obviously done a lot of research in so many areas: mental illness, elevator maintenance, photography, immigration, storage units. What's the most interesting thing you've learned in researching this book?
Oh, that's really hard. All of my books are based on research. Actually, this one probably less so because it doesn't have a historical part. But I was trained as an academic, and so one thing I know how to do is research. And I'm sure there are a couple of academics here today. But when you do research as an academic, you have to go down to every last person who has breathed on your subject, and you got the footnotes and the endnotes and the bibliography. But the advantage of doing research for a novel is you just research until you're not interested anymore, and then you make it all up. So, I found out so many interesting, but one really interesting thing that I found out about street photography is I decided, okay, it's always good to walk in the footsteps of your characters. And Serge takes a lot of photos at the Boston Common, where I happen to live. And so I went out to the Boston Common and I took a bunch of photographs. As I said, it's not easy to do with an iPhone, but I tried to get photos of people that weren't aware I was taking their photos. And my son, who lives in LA, is both a filmmaker and a photographer. And so I sent the photos to him. I said, look, I thought some of them were really quite good. He calls me, he says, Mom, don't put any of those on Facebook. So one of the things I found out was that it is a hell of a lot harder thing to do than you might think.
Okay, what's your best piece of advice for a would-be writer?
I actually have 2, and I've done a lot of teaching, and I start out my classes by saying this. One is, you can't wait for inspiration. You gotta get your butt in the chair and stay there. The second piece is related to that you have to let yourself write it wrong. Annie Dillard said, it's talking about the shitty first draft, every single one of my first drafts is so shitty I would never show them to anybody. And that's why I do 6 or 7 more. So if you're afraid you might make a mistake, or you want to start with a beautiful sentence, you're just going to be working on page 1 forever. So let yourself write it wrong.
And the last one I have is, any offers to make a movie out of any of your books?
We have had many, many bites. I've had many powerful people doing movies, and it's a lot harder than you would think. And so far, no movies. People are looking at Metropolis now. People have been looking at the Art Forger forever, but strange of all strange things, a woman has made a musical out of the Art Forger. And she's amazing. I mean, she did a really good job. She sends me songs, and they did a table read and streamed it, so I got to watch all of these people singing, singing my characters. So she's out shopping it now. Who knows?
Is it called The Art Forger?
It's called The Art Forger, the musical. So you never know.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. So, this is the book. Oh, I wanted to say, first of all, thank you, and I also wanted to thank you for coming in person. This is wonderful to have you here.
It was easy because my son lives here and I got to hang out with him.
I think there's a lot of authors who connect their family and friends on these tours. Thank you. Okay, so this is the book. And so it's available for purchase after you get up, and you can have Barbara sign it, or you can go, if you're on Zoom, feel free to click the link on your chat or buy it at a future in-person festival event. And okay, so coming up, for those of you who have children, for those of you who have children 8 to 11 years old, please join us on Zoom this Sunday, the 13th, when Sarah Sassoon will share the inspirational story of her grandparents, her Iraqi grandparents' immigration to Israel in the book she wrote, Shoam's Bagel. And later in the afternoon, this Sunday at 4, we look forward to seeing you at the University of Laverne on the anniversary of Kristallnacht. We'll hear Stephen Wasserman discuss his book, Grasping at Straws, Letters from the Holocaust. This will be a hybrid event, and there's still time to register. And remember to get started reading on our very first one book, one community selection, Jai Chakrabarty's A Play for the End of the World, so you can be prepared with your questions for our author on Sunday, December 4th at Temple Sinai in Glendale. And now, our raffle. We'll have our author. No, this is the winner. We have the tickets. Oh, here they are. Here they are. Sorry. Okay. Oh, they were in books. Books.
Edie?
Oh,
Ian Taylor.
Our Rock of Gibraltar. Debbie will take a look there. And so that concludes our morning. Thank you for joining us again and supporting the Jewish Book Council. And now enjoy schmoozing, buying books. Barbara will sign them over there. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for coming.